Unfortunately, for the first time in 3 years, the Orioles will not be participating in the MLB postseason, but still a lot of great storylines, a lot of former Orioles to cheer for, and a lot of great baseball coming up here in October. We'll preview it from an Orioles perspective coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, September 30th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to preview the 2025 Major League Baseball postseason, but looking through the Orioles lens. I'll rank my rooting interest from 1 through 12 on teams in the playoffs, talk about all the former Orioles that are littered across all of these teams, and then we'll chat about what my picks are for the playoffs as well. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the FanDuel app today. So the postseason starts today. It's actually a 1 p.m. start here on Tuesday. We got games at 1, 3, 6, and 9 o'clock Eastern time. These wild card days of games are always just incredible. The Orioles were not in them 2 years ago. They were waiting around to see who they'd play. Last year they were in them, and of course they did no scoring and were swept by the Royals. This year is worse than those two, though, because they're not in the playoffs at all. Ending the season 75-87. Make sure to go back and check out Monday's episode if you have not already, recapping the final series of the year, Orioles and Yankees. Now we're on to the playoffs without the O's. Now, disclaimer here, I am recording this episode here on Sunday night just because of timing and my schedule this week to preview the playoffs here on a Tuesday episode. I believe Mike Elias spoke to the media as kind of the end of season press conference on Monday. If there was anything super significant he said, I will get to it on Wednesday's episode, so make sure you're back for that one. If for some reason he said Tony Mansolino is now the full-time manager, I probably had some sort of live breaking episode that happened on Monday night. You may have already listened to that one. But either way, postseason baseball starts today. So as I do every year, whether the O's are in the playoffs or not, kind of preview the postseason, look at it from an Orioles perspective. So we're going to talk about all the former Orioles, guys you love, littered around the league. And I'm basically going to go 1 through 12 in terms of my rooting interest. Now, most of this rooting interest is going to be based on where the former Orioles are and a few other things. If you have different takes about who you're rooting for, let me know. Put them here in the comments. Locked On Orioles YouTube page. Send me an email, lockedonorioles@gmail.com. Certainly want to see who people are cheering for in this postseason. But let's start with number 1 on my list, who I think is probably number 1 on most Orioles fans' list in terms of who they are cheering for this October. That is the San Diego Padres, who were not able to win the NL West. They got the number 5 seed in the National League. They will begin the wild card series in Chicago, best of 3 against the Cubs, starting today at 3 o'clock Eastern time on ABC. We know this team is littered with former Orioles, including Ryan O'Hearn and Ramon Laureano, who the Orioles both dealt to the Padres at this year's deadline. Now, O'Hearn will be in the lineup. Ramon Laureano, who was awesome for the Orioles and then was awesome for the Padres down the stretch, he will miss at least the wild card round and potentially more with a finger fracture. And even it seems like the NLDS would be in jeopardy for Laureano if the Padres get there. He was an important part of their lineup. So you will not see Ramon Laureano in these games, and that is why. Of course, beyond O'Hearn, you'll see Manny Machado in there every single day, still chugging along. Not an incredible season this year, but still a good player. And then potentially you could see Jose Iglesias, the former Oriole, come off the bench for the Padres. And we'll see if Nestor Cortes Jr., remember, briefly was an Oriole who they acquired at the deadline this year. The Padres did, will make that wild card roster. If the Padres did win it all, there's a couple other Orioles former Orioles who would get a ring. Mason McCoy, who was a AAA Norfolk Tide for a while, never made it to the O's. He's an infielder, made it to the Padres, kind of been an up-down guy as a utility infielder this year. He won't be the playoff roster. And the other one is right-handed reliever Logan Gillespie, who again has kind of been an up-down reliever for the Padres the last couple of years after he pitched for the Orioles for a couple of seasons after the O's signed him out of Indy ball. There's also a couple more players with like Orioles or Baltimore connections. Jackson Merrill, the Padres center fielder, is a local kid, went to Severna Park High School, was drafted by the Padres in the first round out of high school. Gavin Sheets, we know him, grew up in the area, played at Mount St. Joe, I believe. Either way, his dad, Larry Sheets, played for the O's. He is on that Padres team, has been a good bat for them this year. And then Robert Suarez, the Padres closer, is the brother of Orioles pitcher Albert Suarez. So a whole lot of connections. And if that's not enough to cheer for the Padres, this is one of the few teams that have never won a World Series. So for this team who's put so much money into this franchise, brought in so many players, they've been so close a couple of times the past couple of years, for them to finally get to and maybe win a World Series, I think would be really, really cool. I think they're the slam dunk number one choice here for teams we're rooting for. Number two for me would be the Milwaukee Brewers. They've got three former Orioles who are probably going to be on their playoff roster. One is Joey Ortiz, who of course was sent over to the Brewers in the Corbin Burns deal before the 2024 season. Ortiz had a pretty good year last year with the Brewers, and then he's been kind of terrible at the plate this year, just a 67 WRC plus. Now, he's been really good defensively, so he's still been a valuable player for them, but Ortiz has not hit. He should be on the roster. We'll see how much he plays for the Brewers, how much they value the defense over the bat. That'll be interesting. The Brewers also do have DL Hall, who did just come off the injured list actually on Sunday and pitch for Milwaukee. Now, TBD if he'll be on the playoff roster. He had a 3.35 ERA this year, but he only threw 38 and 2/3 innings for the Brewers, mostly because, again, so many injuries for DL Hall. We know the story there. He's probably a toss-up if he's going to make the roster. And then the last guy would be Tobias Myers, who, again, was great for the Brewers last year. This year has been more of an up-and-down pitcher, but he did finish the year on the Brewers roster. He's a former Orioles minor leaguer who never did make it to the majors with the O's, but has with a couple of teams, well, really with the Brewers since then, and kind of broke out on the scene for Milwaukee last year. He was a 6th-round pick by the Orioles out of high school back in 2016. Also, guys that would get a ring for the Brewers, even though they aren't like on the active roster right now. Daz Cameron, who has been with the O's in AAA the past couple of years, was traded to the Brewers for Grant Wolfram back in April. Cameron did play a couple games for the Brewers this year. Bruce Zimmerman, who left the Orioles and signed a minor league deal with the Brewers this year, actually made his first and only start for the Brewers this week and then was DFA'd, but would still get a ring. Elvin Rodriguez, remember him, Orioles claimed him off waivers from the Brewers earlier this year. Nestor Cortez Jr. pitched for the Brewers this year before he pitched for the Padres. And Julio Bourbon, who is the first base coach for Milwaukee, briefly played for the Orioles a few years ago. I believe Julio Bourbon, he came in on a minor league deal, but I believe he got to the big leagues with the O's. He was in Norfolk. Yeah, it was 2016. He played 6 games for the Orioles at the end of that season. And beyond that, the Brewers are another team that has never won a World Series. They're a pretty likable, fun team. I really like Pat Murphy, their manager. They play definitely a different style of baseball, and I'm worried it might not work out for them long-term in the playoffs, but definitely I think an easy team to kind of get behind and root for this season. Number 3 on my list actually does not have a former Oriole that'll probably be on the active roster. But number 3 for me is the Philadelphia Phillies. Now, I feel like I'm going to get a split from some Orioles fans on this one. They do not have a former O on the active roster. Guys that would get a ring, Seth Johnson was kind of an up-down reliever for the Phillies this year, but won't be on the playoff roster, I don't think. He was traded to the Phillies from the Orioles for Gregory Soto last year. Nolan Hoffman was an Orioles minor league Rule 5 pick for a couple of years, kind of side-widening reliever, also seemed to be a really good guy in that Orioles system. He was signed by the Phillies this year and made his major league debut earlier this season. And then Bobby Dickerson, remember former Orioles third base coach under Buck Showalter, is the infield coach on this major league staff for the Phillies. To me, I know some people in Baltimore have a big rivalry with Philadelphia. I just think with this roster they've assembled, how close they've been, of course, getting to the World Series in 2022, but losing to the Astros, the heartbreak they've had. It's a fairly likable team, I think. I just think they deserve to win one World Series in this stretch. I think the field is more wide open than it's been in a while this year. And I think this could be the year, and I'm kind of backing the Phillies, and I put them at number 3. Number 4 for me also does not have a former Oriole, But number 4 is the Cleveland Guardians. Not a former Oriole on the active roster. The one guy with O's connections who would get a ring is Andrew Walters. He's kind of been an up-down reliever for the Guardians this year, pitched for them in the playoffs last year. He was drafted by the Orioles, did not sign as like an 18th rounder, went back to college, was awesome, was drafted much, much higher by the Guardians. Historical reasons for this one: they've not won a World Series famously since 1948. They had some awesome moments in the postseason last year when they got to the ALCS, but were knocked out by the Yankees. They have zero offense whatsoever except for Jose Ramirez. I think it would be fun to try to see a team like that find a way to win a World Series. Again, the AL is kind of wide open again, so why couldn't they do it? I think they're kind of a fun team to root for and would certainly be behind them, especially since they changed the name, behind them winning the World Series this year. Number 5 on my list would be, this is where I kind of had them jostled together a little bit. I put number 5 on my list as the Cincinnati Reds. They have one single former Oriole on the active roster, and that is Austin Hayes. Not my favorite former Oriole of all time, but you'll see him in the postseason for the Reds this year. And 2 guys who would also get a ring who played for the Reds at one point this season are Austin Wynns and Wade Miley. Historically, they haven't won a World Series since 1990, so it's been a while, but not even as long as the Orioles. I don't know. I just think it'd be funny for the Reds to win. I mean, I don't think they're that good, and somehow they snuck into the postseason because the Mets choke. And even though they lost on the final day of the season, the Mets also lost to the Marlins, so the Reds clinched that final spot. I don't know. I had all these teams kind of bunched up. I put the Reds number 5. Number 6 for me is the Detroit Tigers. The former Orioles who's going to be on that roster most likely, Jahmai Jones. You'll see him hitting leadoff probably if the Tigers face a lefty in the postseason. Jack Flaherty didn't have the greatest time with the Orioles, but he's probably going to start game 2 for the Tigers in their wild card series against the Guardians. And then Brennan Hanafy, former Orioles minor league pitcher who kind of burst onto the scene as a reliever for the Tigers last year. He's been more up and down this year, but I think he's probably going to make the playoff roster. I don't know if he'll be in any really high leverage scenarios. And then 2 other guys who would get a ring: Charlie Morton, who's of course traded from the Orioles to the Tigers at the deadline and then was DFA'd by the Tigers. Morton did have a cool moment on Sunday, got to start the game, claimed by the Braves, the team that drafted him, the team he won a World Series with, the team he spent so many years with. He was able to start his final game with the Braves Sunday, got a cool moment when he walked off the mound. He's probably retiring, but could get a ring from this. And then Dietrich Enns, our guy Dietrich Enns, came over from the Tigers at the deadline, would potentially get a ring as well. Historically, they haven't won since 1984, so 1 year shorter drought than the Orioles have. It would be funny after their just insane collapse where they had a huge lead over the Guardians and didn't even win the division and just barely snuck into the playoffs as the final wildcard team to then just snap their fingers and go win the World Series. They're a fairly likable team. I like AJ Hinch, even though he did come from that Houston team. I don't know. It'd be cool to see Detroit win. So those are my top 6. Next up, the bottom 6. There's a couple in the bottom 6 I wouldn't mind seeing win a World Series. There's a couple that I'll also be actively rooting against, and I think you know who those are, but we'll get to those coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Nutrafol. You've probably seen a million ads for hair growth products and thought, sure, like that one actually works. There's so many products out there, it's hard to know which ones are actually going to do anything. That's why you should give Nutrafol a closer look. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand, trusted by over 1.5 million people. And now Nutrafol is the official hair growth partner of Major League Baseball. You can feel great about what you're putting in your body since Nutrafol hair growth supplements are backed by peer-reviewed studies and NSF-certified contents, the gold standard in third-party certification for supplements. So see thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. And for a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listener $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. Find out why Nutrafol is the best-selling hair growth supplement brand at Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code LOCKEDONMLB. So I gave out my top 6 of teams I'm cheering for in the postseason. Padres, Brewers, Phillies, Guardians, Reds, Tigers, the top 6 in order. On to number 7 is the Seattle Mariners, who won the AL West, got themselves a bye in the first round as the number 2 seed in the American League. They'll face the winner of Guardians Tigers in the ALDS. Mariners have one single former Oriole on the active roster. That is Edward Bizardo, one of the great names to say with a Baltimore accent, as Scott Pimpel pointed out. Edward Bizardo, 30-year-old right-hander who pitched for the Orioles back in 2023 in 3 games for the O's, then went to Seattle, and he's been pretty good since then. He's been one of their men's setup, man. 2.42 ERA in 72 appearances for Seattle this season. You will certainly see him pitching in the playoffs. Guys that would also get a ring: Jose Castillo, now with the Orioles; Luis F. Castillo, the other Luis Castillo that the O's claimed off waivers this year and then spent most of the year in AAA. And then Zach Pop. Remember Zach Pop? Former Orioles minor leaguer. They lost him in the Rule 5 draft. He bounced around and pitched briefly for the Mariners this season. Historical reasons: well, the Mariners have never won a World Series. They've never even been to a World Series. They won their first AL West title since 2001 this season. They seem to be pretty likable. They got Cal Raleigh, the big dumper with his 60 home runs, who I honestly think should win AL MVP over Aaron Judge. There's just been some weird stuff between the Orioles and the Mariners over the past couple of seasons. Everything, despite the fact they don't have many former Orioles, should point to the fact that I should be easily cheering for the Mariners and they should be higher up on this list. And if you have the Mariners much higher on this list, I think that's a very reasonable take, and I don't blame you at all. There's just, I don't know, there's been weird things with like Felix Bautista and the Mariners reporter, and there was the weird stuff with like George Kirby in that one game last year. And I don't know, something with the Mariners, I don't know, it just doesn't sit right with me. It might be a weird thing I have for the Seattle Mariners. I'm not really sure. I love Ichiro. I don't know. Either way, I have them at 7th. I 5, 6, and 7 for me was so jumbled. I easily could have had even 4, 5, 6, and 7. I could have easily had the Mariners as high as 4. I have them down at 7. I wouldn't be mad to see them win the World Series. Like if they're in the World Series and they're playing the Dodgers or something, like I'm cheering for the Mariners. But otherwise, yeah, they're a little further down, but I'd be okay with seeing them win it. Number 8 on my list is the Chicago Cubs, the number 4 seed in the National League, playing the Padres in the Wild Card Series. 2 former Orioles on the active roster. Justin Turner, a long time ago, was an Oriole before he went to the Mets, was non-tendered by the Mets, and then found his way to the Dodgers and figured out how to hit. And Andrew Kittredge, who, of course, the Orioles dealt to the Cubs at this year's deadline. It has kind of become the de facto closer for the Cubs because their usual closer, Daniel Palencia, went down with an injury. TBD if he's going to be back for the playoffs. If not, you might see Kittredge in the 9th inning for the Cubs, so get ready for that. A couple other guys who would get a ring. Vidal Brujan was with the Cubs before he briefly played for the Orioles this year. Brooks Kriske pitched for the Cubs a couple of times this year, was an Orioles reliever back in 2021. Ryan Flaherty, potential candidate for the Orioles managerial opening, is the bench coach for the Cubs. And Quentin Berry, who played for the Orioles back in 2014, is the third base coach on this Cubs staff as well. Of course, they did just win and broke their long drought back in 2016. I'd be fine with them winning again. They've won semi-recently, so I'd rather see other teams do it, but wouldn't mind seeing them win. Now we drop into the Final Four. These are the 4 teams I'm probably actively rooting against here in the postseason. Those top 8, if any of them win, I'd like to see some more than the others, but I'm okay if any of them win. Bottom 4, I'm probably rooting against. Number 1 is the Los Angeles Dodgers, only because they won last year, and I like seeing new teams win. 1 former Oriole on the active roster is Tanner Scott. Maybe kind of lost their closer role because he's been pitching so poorly recently. We saw that in the series in Baltimore. And then would also get a ring is Evan Phillips. I believe he is out for the season with injury. Former Orioles reliever who was the Dodgers closer for a while there, then kind of fell off and got hurt, but would still get another ring. Otherwise, yeah, just I don't love seeing teams win back-to-back. Don't love seeing super teams win it all. So that's why I'm cheering against them. But if the Dodgers were in the World Series against any of these next 3 teams from the AL East, I would still be cheering for the Dodgers in the World Series, just like I was last year when they played the Yankees. Number 10 on the list. And all 3 of these teams, again, there's no scenario where I cheer for them if they get to the World Series. Number 10 is the Toronto Blue Jays. I don't like the Blue Jays, but the only reason I have them above these next 2 teams because they do have a few former Orioles. Anthony Santander would win a ring. Kevin Gausman would win a ring, and Sir Anthony Dominguez, who the Orioles dealt to the Blue Jays this year, would also win a ring. To see Santander and Gausman win a championship, I mean, those guys mean so much to me as an Orioles fan. That would be awesome to see. Guys who would also get a ring, Easton Lucas He's pitched some for the Blue Jays this year, was a former Orioles minor leaguer, came over in the Jonathan VR trade, and then was sent to the A's in the Fuji trade. Dylan Tate has been up and down with the Blue Jays this year, and DeMarlo Hale, former Orioles third base coach, is the associate manager in that Blue Jays dugout as well. I will be cheering against Toronto, mostly if they make it far, but if I have to stomach any of these three AL East teams winning, it would be Toronto, just mostly for Santander and Gausman winning a World Series. I think you know who the final two teams are. I think these are in most people's bottom two. Number 11 for me is the Boston Red Sox. They do not have a single former Orioles player who has played for them this year or who is currently on the roster. Two former Orioles people would get a ring if they win. Kyle Hudson, former Oriole, famously scored the tying run in the Curse of the Andino game as a pinch runner in 2011 for the O's. He is the Red Sox third base coach. And then Chris Holt, former Orioles pitching coach, is currently in his first year as the bullpen coach for the Boston Red Sox. I'll be actively cheering against them. However, not in the wild card series, because the wild card series in New York will be Yankees Red Sox. And number 12 on the list, for obvious reasons, is the New York Yankees. If they did win it all, former Oriole Austin Slater most likely will be on the playoff roster. They traded for him at the deadline. And two other guys who would get a ring, J.C. Escarra, who began the year as the Yankees' backup catcher, no longer on the roster. He's back in AAA, but former Orioles minor leaguer and former guest of the Locked On Orioles podcast. And also Rico Garcia, who pitched one game for the Yankees this year when he was bouncing around on waivers, and end of the year basically as the Orioles setup man, would also be in line for one as well. But pretty self-explanatory. I never want the Yankees to win anything, so I will be cheering for the Red Sox in that first series. In terms of who I'm cheering for in the first round, based on those rankings, I'll be cheering for the Guardians over the Tigers, the Red Sox over the Yankees, the Reds over the Dodgers, and the Padres over the Cubs in the wild card series that begin today. So that's the cheering ratings. Again, let me know right here in the Locked On Orioles YouTube comments how you'd change your list, who you're cheering for, who you're rooting against, and what former Orioles you're excited to see play in this year's postseason. But now comes the most important part. And by most important part, I mean least important part. My postseason picks for 2025 that are sure to be wrong are coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right, pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel's great because it gives you so many ways to play. Parlays, player props, even following live lines during games. Makes watching football even more exciting, especially when you really don't want to watch the Ravens play football anymore. Whether you're a casual fan, you love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes game day so much easier and so much better at times, right? And also, hey, there's baseball on FanDuel as well. I'm about to give my picks for the MLB postseason. Probably be smart to go against them and put those wagers in on FanDuel. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. So it is time to pick the postseason. Unfortunately, the Orioles not a part of it this year. Let's start with the wild card round. In the American League, the 6-seed Tigers collapsing down the stretch, but somehow sneaking into the playoffs over the Astros will take on the Cleveland Guardians, the 3-seed, the AL Central champions, but did not get the bye. They were once behind the Tigers by 15.5 games and made it up all the way to finish one game ahead of them. That will be AL Wildcard Series number 1. Those are 1 o'clock games on ESPN here on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then Thursday if necessary. I think I'm going to take the Guardians. I mean, the vibes have been so opposite directions between Cleveland and Detroit during this stretch that even with Tarek Skubal going game 1, I think the Tigers win game 1 with Skubal, and then the Guardians just play Guardian ball and win games 2 and 3 to take that series in 3 games. Next up, the other AL Wildcard Series, 4th-seeded Yankees, who were not able to come up with the AL East on the final day, who are sent to the wildcard round against the Boston Red Sox, had kind of an up-and-down season, but clinched the playoffs on Friday night to get the 5 seed. I'm going to take Boston here. I know this Yankee offense is awesome, but their bullpen's had some struggles. They don't have Garrett Cole. I don't know, maybe I'm just picking with my heart more than my head, but I think Boston might be a more well-rounded team than the Yankees. I'll take the Red Sox in 3 in this series. That is 6:08 p.m. starts on ESPN each of the next 3 days. Over the National League wild card, 6-seeded Reds. I don't think they're a good baseball team. They went 83-79, yet they got the final spot in the NL wild card somehow, some way, and they will face the Dodgers. I do not see a more lopsided series at any point in this playoffs. Doesn't mean it'll go this way, but that's 9 o'clock starts on ESPN the next 3 days if necessary. I'm taking the Dodgers in 2. They won the NL West, but didn't get enough wins to get the bye, so they are the number 3 seed, not the super team we thought they'd be in the regular season. Their starting rotation of the Dodgers has come together. I think they're going to dominate the Reds in this series, as they should. Final wildcard series, 4th-seeded Cubs kind of coasted the whole way, but just were never as good as the Brewers, so they get the top wildcard. And then the Padres, who were in a fight with the Dodgers, but couldn't win the NL West, so they get the 5 seed. This is a tough one. I like this Cubs team, but I'm going to take the Padres just because they have more of the postseason experience. I have questions about this Padres team, about Dylan Cease, about Michael King, about their lineup that doesn't really hit for power. They lost Ramon Laureano. I just think the Cubs haven't been there since 2020 when they got swept out of the first round of the weird COVID playoffs. They haven't really done this much at all since winning the World Series. The Padres have. They know how to win in the postseason. I know it's cliche, but I'm taking the Padres in a sweep in that series. That takes us to the division series. We will start with the number 1 seed Blue Jays, who won the AL East and finished with the best record in the American League. They would then take on the Red Sox in my predictions. I think this Blue Jays team just reminds me almost to a T so much of the 2023 Orioles. The way they've won close games, they play the platoons, everything has gone their way, not really injured. It all came crashing down on the Orioles that year. I think it's going to come crashing down on the Blue Jays. I'll take the Red Sox in 4 over the Blue Jays to advance to the ALCS. Then on the other side, you have the 2 seed Seattle Mariners winning the AL West for the first time in 24 years, taking on the Guardians. Mariners are just too good of a team, I think, to lose to this Cleveland squad. I've got the Mariners in 4 with that starting rotation and an offense that, since adding Josh Naylor and Eugenio Suarez at the deadline, has no longer become their big issue. They're a much better hitting team. They've got Cal Raleigh. I think they make quick work of the Guardians. On the NLDS side, number 1 seed is the Brewers. Ran the table incredibly for most of the season, winning the NL Central, best record in the National League. I've got them taking on the Padres, who are trying to make their way. This is probably the toughest series to pick. I'm going to take the Brewers, though. I think the Padres, there's just something weird going on about them this year. I think the run ends here again. I'm going to take the Brewers in 5 in a close series, enough timely hitting. The bullpen's getting healthier. They did get their closer, Trevor McGill, back on Sunday. He looked good in the inning he threw. I think that's a difference maker for Milwaukee. I think enough hits come from somebody in that lineup. Even though the Padres have the best bullpen in baseball, I'm taking the Brewers in 5 to win that series. Phillies, the number 2 seed, winning the NL East. They're taking on the Dodgers. Man, the Phillies have so much pitching. Even with Zach Wheeler out, I think this is an awesome 5-game series, but I'm giving it to the Phillies over the Dodgers. I think the super team Dodgers go out in the NLDS. Back to the ALCS, where I've got the Red Sox and the Mariners. I'm going to take the Red Sox in 6 games. I just think they're a really, really well-rounded team this year. They have enough starting pitching. Garrett Whitlock is a true ace. He could come in relief if he needed to later in the series. Lucas Giolito's been good. They can find enough, I think, with these young arms like Connolly Early and Peyton Tolley, and maybe get something out of Kyle Harrison and Brian Bayo. Chapman's been unhittable at the back end of that bullpen. Garrett Whitlock's been great. And that offense, even after trading Devers, is really, really scary. I think that's more than the Mariners can handle. And Mariners have some serious bullpen problems as well. I've got the Red Sox in 6, advancing to the World Series. On the other side, Brewers, Phillies, NLCS. I think this is also a situation where the playoff experience comes in big. It's got to happen at some time for this Phillies team. Maybe this is the year. Bryce Harper, JT Realmuto, Kyle Schwarber, just so much thump. You know, even without Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola's looking better. They've got Ranger Suarez. Christopher Sanchez is incredible. The bullpen has some questions, but getting Juan Duran at the back end of that bullpen is just awesome. Just really, truly awesome. I'm going to take the Phillies over the Brewers in 5 to advance to the World Series. That gives me a Phillies-Red Sox World Series and the Phillies in 6 are your World Series champions. I like a lot about this Red Sox team, but Durant at the back end of the game, that starting rotation the Phillies have is better than the Red Sox. I think the lineup has a higher ceiling than the Red Sox. So the Red Sox lineup might be a little bit deeper. We'll see which of their young players maybe they get back into that lineup. Like, do they get Roman Anthony back? We'll see at that point. But I like this Phillies team. They've built this for years and years. I think the year has to be coming, and I think it's 2025. We see the Philadelphia Phillies win the World Series. So remember, all those picks bound to be wrong. So probably bet against them would be your best bet. And I will say the World Series MVP is Christopher Sanchez. Just has 2 unbelievable starts for the Phillies in the World Series, enough to win the MVP. That'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know in the YouTube comments where I went wrong with my rankings for favorite team in the playoffs and my picks for the postseason. I'll be back tomorrow discussing anything Mike Elias might have said in that end of season press conference. And we're doing the big picture Orioles offseason preview, kind of taking the 1,000-foot view of what the O's have going on this offseason. Free agency decisions. How much pitching do they need to add? Would they pay for a big bat? Will guys like Ryan Mountcastle or Jorge Mateo be back on this roster? Will they re-sign any of their free agents? What's the future looking like for their young position players? What's the Rule 5 draft look like? The waiver claiming, the 40-man roster, all of it. We're going to do that big level preview to get you set for this offseason, which doesn't really start for another month, but kind of a dip into the waters of the most important Orioles offseason in a long time. That's coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.